Alright, so I'm going to use my fettling knife to cut the lid off. It is really firm, and since I have kind of an intricate cut, I'm going to go really slow so that I can be a little bit more precise. And I'm not trying to cut through the whole thing at once. I'm trying to like maybe cut that much, go all the way around, and then go a little deeper and try. So I don't want to try to make a one swoop. Okay, so it's close. Now I'm going to go a little bit deeper across. Okay, there you go. All right, so I have my lid and I have my vessel. Okay, the next step is figuring out how deep the wall is going to be. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my needle tool and I'm going to draw how deep I want or how wide I want the wall, or how thick, right? You know, and it's good to try to be perfect, but in reality, the nice thing about clay is if we make a mistake, we can always attach a new piece and patch and fix. Okay, so that's there. Now I'm going to get a loop tool. Okay, and I'm going to start to dig it out. I could do the same thing for the lid, but I'm going to start with the body. And you're just a little bit at a time gonna hollow out the form. You know, and you can be a little bit more aggressive in the middle because you don't have to worry about cutting through the sides, but as you get closer to the side, you're gonna want to be a little bit more careful and thoughtful about cutting that. Now, all of this clay that you're pulling out should be plastic, okay? So you want to save that. Maybe it's better to work on top of a plastic bag and every so often kind of spray that. That way your clay doesn't dry out on you and you can reuse this clay for another project. So we don't want it to dry out to bone dry. All right, we have already made our slip, so we want to keep this new clay nice and soft. Okay, so I'm going to continue doing this. I'm going to pause the video because it's get kind of boring. But I'll come back when I'm a little bit farther down and almost complete. Okay, so you can see that I've made some more progress getting down there. One of the things I have to pay attention to though is I've got this spot right here that, if you think about it, it's kind of a low spot on this plane. If I keep going down and don't go in when I'm carving, there's a very good chance that I cut a hole there. So as I get closer to that area, I need to be really mindful and kind of measure. See, like I'm right close to that area, so I have to start making sure that I don't carve straight through that hole and create a hole. One of the things that you could do at this point is start to clean up and maybe flip it over and use the more rectangular one and start cleaning up the walls. Right? So I might do that before I dig down farther, is just do a really good job cleaning up the walls. Okay, so you can see that I've done a pretty good job cleaning it up. Now I still have some rough spots, but I can use, my finger or a wooden modeling tool and clean up those sides. But I know the lighting's not great, but I'm gonna carve down more, so I'm right about there. So I need to if I keep this thickness, I got another ½ inch to go. And I'm still trying to be mindful of that spot. So I got to be careful. I did good here. So, and remember, we want to, keep these wet so that we can still use it later on. Okay? But don't forget about keeping these damp. I still have to take care of my lid, all right? So it's good to keep this wrapped up in a separate thing, so while you're working on this doesn't dry out on you, okay? Okay, so I tried to get a light a little closer. You can see where I've gotten into the corners down at the base, and it kind of hooks in a little bit. So I get my hand pretty far in there. So I'm pretty happy with the rough cut of that. So I need to get rid of all of those tool marks. Now there's a couple different ways that you can go about doing that. I think the best way for where you can reach is your actual finger, but you could use a wooden modeling tool. Excuse me. And this one came with your kit, right? So it's got what's called a sculptor's thumb on the end of the knife, and then you've got the knife part. So you can take the sculptor's thumb and smooth out, right? And just as we use the rib on the pinch pots, I recommend going in multiple directions. So you can go this way, side, side, and then come this way. Okay, so that's pretty good, right? Comparatively to those. Now you can always spray in there, take your finger, and polish it that way. Just remember that, if you spray too much, it could get sloppy really quick. And you could also weaken the walls if you get too much water pooling for a long period of time. So that's kind of what I'm looking for, that nice smooth texture. I don't want to see tool marks. Because one of the beauties, I think one of the cool things about really good craftsmanship is when you can't tell how the person put it together and how they built it. It kind of puts some magic into the work. So with Kurinuki, it's really hard for people to figure out how you did it because it's such an organic shape that there's some surprise in it on how you actually were to construct it. So I'm going to finish this. I'm going to smooth all that out, and then I'm going to do the same exact thing on the lid, and then I'll show you how to make the lid fit properly. Okay, but the first part is hollowing out this side and hollowing out this side. Okay, so I've gotten the lid done, and I've gotten the bottom done. I just sprayed it and smoothed out the edges. So that's how it's going to fit together. Okay, and if you notice, as I was working on it, things kind of shifted, so I want to make sure that it meets the way it should before I move on. So I'm just kind of pushing things back into place. I think that's pretty good. I'm happy with that. What I'm going to do right now is I'm going to put this aside and I'm going to deal with my remains. Because I need to keep this, like I said before, I want to keep it hydrated. And this is good stuff. So I'm going to wedge it back together again and kind of knead it back into a nice soft plastic consistency. So this is like, because I've been spraying it and keeping it wet, it went from being, you know, a little bit like a hard plastic. But that's a sizable amount of clay. That's probably like a pound of clay, and there's no reason to let it dry out. So I'm going to wedge it by hand and bring it back so a nice plastic state so I can keep using it. So to do that, I'm just going to keep adding water and kneading it. And if it's too hard for your hands, then do a smaller piece like this and leave that and then come back to it. So this might take me a minute or two to do, so I'm going to turn this off and I'll show you what it looks like when I'm done. So I've gotten this back to a nice soft plastic state. Okay, just by adding water and just by, you know, folding it over on itself and squishing it and rolling it. So this is still good to go. I'm going to put all this back in my clay bag. I'm going to save a piece about that big. Well, I made this Kurinuki a while back, and it's totally different clay body. This is a porcelain, so it's really pure white. But what we need to do is we need to make a lid that's actually going to fit and not, you know, stay on there. So you can see how I made this rim so that it fits inside. Now if you wanted to, you could put this rim here so the lid is free. It's totally up to you which one you want to do. But that's what we need to do next. Okay, we need to make a lid that locks in place. Okay, so like I said, we need to make a rim so this locks in place and won't slide off. So we need to decide whether that rim's going to go on the lid or on the body. And I think I'm going to put it on the body. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to roll a coil, and I'm using that clay that I just kind of reconstituted and reprocessed. So I'm just going to roll a snake of clay. And I want it'd be nice if this goes all the way around. Looks like it's going to be a little short. It's okay. So I'll just make another one and try to get it the same thickness. Okay, and maybe that one almost wants to make it. Okay, regardless, we need to score and we need to slip, right, to attach stuff. So you can take your fork, okay, and we need to score the body. And remember, you can also use your needle tool if you want as well. Remember, this roughs up the surface, gives the clay and the slip a chance to commingle, creates more surface area for that new piece of clay to bite into. Okay, so I did a good job roughing that up. And now we're going to score their coils too. Now that fork's a little much. Maybe this one works better. You know, there's a tool for everything. And like I said, if you wanted to, you could totally use your needle tool. Totally up to you, what you feel comfortable with. As long as you're scoring and making, getting good scores and you're really roughing up the body, it'll be fine. Okay, so I'm going to get a little slip. Paint it in there. Remember, you don't have to use a brush. You could just use your fingertip or a wooden modeling tool. Okay. And then we're going to put this on so that it's kind of overhanging, right? Because we want that lip to happen. Oh, and it did make it all the way around. Awesome. All right, and now I'm going to compress and push this coil in place. I am going to have to go back and clean it up without a doubt. But right now I'm just trying to marry the two together, or weld them, however you want to describe it. Now, once again, you have to be patient with your project because this is really sloppy, wet. There's a lot of, extra stuff from the slip squirting everywhere. And it's getting a little bit gross. So I'm going to have to let this set up and dry. And that's why you have to have that patience. You can see how I kind of pinched and pulled it up a little bit. I actually have a little thin spot right here and here, so I actually might add a little bit more slip and fill in some of those areas that I pinched it a little too thin with my coil, with a new coil, and just kind of reinforce that area because I did, like I said, pinched a little hard and lost some material. So I'm going to kind of fortify that a little bit. I'm going to do that here too. So that's the nice thing about working with clay is you can always add more and you can remove, right? So it's a cool material to sculpt with because if you make a mistake, it's totally different than carving in stone, because when you carve in stone and you take a big chunk out, you can't put it back. So clay is really versatile in that regard. So I'm just kind of reinforcing those areas where I pinched it a little thin. Now I didn't add slip there because it's super wet. It's really tacky, and I don't think there's going to be an issue with that. All right. Before I really work on this anymore, I'm going to take a wooden modeling tool and I'm going to clean it up a little bit, and then I'm going to let it sit. And I've got to let this rim get to the same consistency as the body, which is leather hard. All right, so I'm just going to clean up this edge. Now what I'm trying to do is make sure that this edge is the same thickness as this, right? So that it sits in place. So what I'm kind of doing is kind of pushing the coil back a little bit and reclaiming that lip. And I'm still kind of worried about that spot right there. It looks really thin. Okay, so I'm just going to put that on there. Okay. All right. And like I said, I've got to let this sit because it is getting kind of soupy and yucky and sticky, and my fingers are getting gross. So as I'm touching my project or my Kurinuki, I'm leaving fingerprints with wet slip. So I need to go wash my hands, and this needs to sit. Now, it's best actually to let this sit in a bag wrapped up. And the reason for that is you don't want this part to continue to dry. We just want that to dry. And when we wrap it up in plastic, the moisture from here is going to get pulled into here. And the two new pieces are going to equalize. So I'm going to wrap it up. And, you know, maybe I leave it for a couple hours. You got to come back and check things. So I'm going to leave this wrapped up for a couple hours and then let these two kind of like get together in terms of the same moisture content. And then I'll pull it out and let it dry. And just like when you check on it, just check to see if it's tacky. If you can leave your fingerprint in it, it's too wet to work with, right? If it's firm and leather hard and it doesn't move when you touch it like this, it's not wobbly, then get back to work on cleaning it up. So like I said, I'm going to wrap it up. I'm also going to wrap up my lid in a separate bag. So I don't want this to dry anymore. I want these to always be at the same. Okay.